Well, this all started about 3 years ago, and it's called 417 because the large nugget out there was actually 417 pounds. We did send it up to Brian Lee's to clean it up a little bit because generally it's black on the outside or has a lot of quartz on it. And Brian took off about 5 pounds of silver altogether. But it is from an old historic district, and those of you who have been in the Smithsonian Mineral Museum, there is one 30-pound nugget that was found in probably the 1880s and acquired by the Smithsonian at that time. But this is the area in general, and the hills in the back are the Apache Peaks. It's otherwise known as Richmond Basin, although this isn't part of Richmond Basin proper. I've thrown this in there. This is from Colorado, but it is from 1879, 140 years ago. And if you look at the faces, there's a little bit of distrust in there all around. So we had the prospector, probably up in the San Juans, and somebody scrutinizing his activity. Well, in Arizona, it was the other way around. So the Apaches are credited with finding native silver in Nugget Wash, north of Globe. And only after they started using that as bullets did the prospectors come in, and they, having experience in California, other places, they traced those nuggets up to the bedrock source, which is the McMorris mine. And then after McMorris was found, McMillanville was found. And so Globe was a thriving community based initially on silver. And Globe itself is named after I believe it was a 9-inch diameter globe of silver. And only after was copper then discovered. So initially, I like to throw this out there because we had the opposite happen in Arizona. The Apaches found the silver first, and then the prospectors followed suit. Okay, just a little bit of the history there. I've probably discussed most of this already, but probably 6 or 7 high-grade veins were found and exploited at that time. And then, of course, the Apaches were active in the region at that time. The city of Globe was relatively safe, but any outlying areas were subject to Apache attack. The copper mines were then found, put into production, and so the focus of all activity up in Globe was copper. And not only that, but in the 1890s, the United States briefly went on the silver standard. And under that, the U.S. government was obligated to buy, I think, 3 million ounces of silver a year from miners. So it was a boom for miners. And most likely, this was the time when these mines thrived. And after about 2 or 3 years, they went back to the gold standard. And so the price of silver dropped, and all silver mining activity in this region came to a halt. And basically, that was the situation for the last 100 years, 120 years. It was a forgotten district. Occasionally, somebody would find a piece of silver up there. The last big piece was found in the 1960s. It was a 16-pound piece found up on Richmond Basin. I want to introduce Sam Zamora. He is a weekend metal detectorist. He's a plant operator up in Globe. And he and his partner had spent 7 years looking for gold with their metal detectors. And they found exactly 3 grams of gold in 7 years. So talk about persistence. These guys really are the kings. Eventually, Sam and his partner's wife were out metal detecting, not in our area, but probably about 5 kilometers away. And they found this, which is about a 16-pound piece of native silver. They found smaller pieces, but this was the largest one. And if you note, this one is very well rounded, and it's had a lot of the quartz that we have in ours knocked off it. So this has traveled, and it's traveled from one of the other veins that are in the district. So just a little aside is, I did not know Sam personally, but a close friend of mine, Frank Valenzuela, who's here now today, called me up one weekend, and he said, I have a friend of mine. He's got his truck outside, and he's got native silver in it. And I've been a geologist for 40 years, and nobody has ever called me with that kind of comment. And so you just don't, as a geologist, in the exploration business, you don't really hear about this. So I said, well, is this a fraud? Because in 40 years, I've seen a lot of frauds too. And he said, no. He said, I wouldn't put this in my collection. But he said, it looks like silver. And so I still wasn't convinced. And so I had Frank send Sam down to a Safeway near my house, and I looked at these things in a parking lot because I didn't want this guy anywhere close to my house. It could be a fraud. Who knows? So once he pulled down the tailgate of his truck, he had probably 200 pounds of silver in nuggets. And these guys, after their initial discovery of this 16-pound piece, they went 2 years without finding anything else. Nothing. But they kept at it. They went to different washes around the area. And eventually, they found an 80-pound piece, an 120-pound piece, and lots of smaller ones, the 30-pound range, down to a few grams. Now, this is Brian in Brian Lee's lab, and he has cleaned up a few of these. So generally when you find these, they're encrusted with quartz, or the quartz on the outside of it. The silver is generally on the inside. And so what Brian did was put some of this in hydrofluoric, and he leached a little bit of the quartz off it. And that's what you're seeing outside with the big one. The smaller ones have not been leached. And so here's the 120-pounder. And by the way, it doesn't take much silver to make 120 pounds. And then there's the 80-pounder and probably a 7 or 8-pounder there. Well, once we identified this really as native silver, we made a deal with the Metal Detectorists. They had not a great interest in staking any claims out there, but to any miner, you realize you need claims. So we staked both placer claims and lode claims out there. The placer claims to cover the area that had been found, and then the lode claims on top of that with the anticipation that we would find the source of these nuggets. And so here we've got our claim staker out there. We've now got probably over 100 claims, Hardrock claims. We've got a few placer claims. And then we brought in more metal detectors. So we brought in really professional guys to find the silver. And they walked essentially the same ground as the initial detectorists walked, with better machines. So in the evolution of metal detecting, they're coming out with a new design every couple of years. And these new ones were much more effective. And I would say we found probably another 150 pounds of small silver, anywhere from an ounce up to 20 pounds. Also in the same arroyo. And there's actually my boy pulling out probably a 10-pounder right there. So all these were found in small gravel benches, and really sometimes sitting on top of the caliche. So, but in all cases, it's generally around a small arroyo up there. So they've been transported. But you know, there's a big difference between gold nuggets and silver nuggets. And gold nuggets, there are 1 million of them in the world. And when you erode a gold deposit, all the gold is generally preserved. It's an inert element, and when it travels, it's not destroyed. It actually melds with other pieces of gold, and the gold fragments, the gold nuggets, could get bigger. In the case of silver, the only way you're going to find silver nuggets is to beat Mother Nature to them. Because if you look at the big nugget outside and some of the pieces I'll show you, they're covered with a rind of chlorargyrite. And chlorargyrite is basically silver oxide, it's tarnish. And so if you don't find these things, they're going to dissolve. And so in my mind, these are much rarer than even meteorites. You know, we're being bombarded with meteorites every day, and there's 1 million gold nuggets, but there's probably only, I would say, 500 silver nuggets in the world. And I'd say we got 300 of those right now. Okay, here's just, you know, how we excavated. So the detectorists, and we went out there as group. You know, there were probably 10 people out there and 3 or 4 detectors. So when the detectorists would have a hit, then, you know, the less professional people would dig the hole up. And so these were generally found from a few inches below the surface up to 3 feet. And 3 feet's about the limit of the detector. So here's some of the finds over on the right side there. And that's how they look when they're coming out of the ground. They're covered with this chlorargyrite. It's a black mineral. And interestingly enough, we found about a 50-pounder last year, brought it out, and knocked a lot of the dirt off with a jet wash. And I collected all the soil that came off. And this is just soil. It's not the nuggets or anything. It's soil. And I put it in for an assay, and it came back at 2% silver. That's just the soil around these nuggets. Probably within a month of starting the detector work, we found this piece. This is the 417-pounder, and this is how it looked out of the ground. So you see it now in the museum, but this is what it looked like when it came out. And this is it was only about 10 centimeters deep. It was less than 5 inches deep, the edge of it. And so we took it out, and we're probably about 3/4 of a mile away from any dirt road even. So we had to haul this out so that, you know, it was ecstatic to hear about the discovery. It was the Metal Detectorists that found this. But then at the same moment, I said, how are we going to get this thing out of there? Couldn't even get an ATV in to slide this thing out. It was the country it's not mountainous, but it's broken up enough that you can't get an ATV in there. So we fabricated a little sled out of corrugated tin, corrugated metal, and then folded this up like a papoose almost, you know. And you can see it's not exceptionally large, but it's impossible for one man to even turn that over. And so here we're rolling it onto a carpet, which we wrapped it in before we drug it out. And here it is wrapped up in our little sled, and it was basically like a human dog sled team, and we were the dogs. And it's easier actually to pull this stuff on rocks than it is on the sand. There's a lot less resistance pulling it over rocks. And here it is, we've pulled it down the sand wash here, and we only had one major obstacle where there was a little waterfall there, and we had to get a ladder to slide the sled with the nugget down on the other side of it. And that was probably the trickiest part, because although it's solid, almost solid metal, you don't want to drop it and break it in two and have the second largest silver nugget in the world. So it was it was a long pull, and it took us about 5 hours to get it 3/4 of a mile. Okay, there we are loading it up. That was probably one of the worst days of my life, I tell you. It's only satisfying when it gets back into the truck. Before that, it's just a real pain. Here's the weigh-in. So we brought it back to the ranch, and the only way to move this around is with an engine lifter. You know, there's no easy way for 2 or 3 or 4, even 4 humans to move that. You know, it's just too heavy. And so it weighed in at 417. So it was a happy day. Now there were larger silver nuggets in the world. Like the Smuggler mine up in Colorado, I think they had the largest. It was probably 2 tons. But that didn't last. You know, that was mined back in the 1880s, 1890s, and that was quickly broken up and made into silver dollars. Let's see. What do you think? Oh, there we go. Okay.
Very expensive.
Okay, yeah, apparently. Okay, this is the cleanup. So we sent it up with Brian Lees to Denver, and he put it in the horse trough here and soaked it in some special solution. It will remain a secret, I guess, even to myself. But he cleaned it up. And they probably did a little bit of mechanical work on it. But in general, they hydrofluoric part of it, and then they put, I think it was silver bright on it to try to keep it from tarnishing again. And it does tarnish. If you don't wash all the silver bright off, it'll start to tarnish again. So the black there is that chlorargyrite. There we go. Okay, and that's just a display. You really don't get a scale for it. We need a person standing there. But Brian did a great job cleaning all that up. That is the largest. I think it's on the left. I think this is actually, although it was proclaimed to be a silver nugget, I think it's actually just a piece of galena from a silver mine up in BC. But that's probably the Smuggler mine nugget, and that's been broken up. Is this unique? Well, it's rare. And for me, it's 1 in a billion chance discovery. But these type of deposits are not unique. They're rare, but not unique. Now, this is from the Cobalt Mine, Ontario, and I'm sure you've seen samples of this every year. Guys go through the dumps up there and find more. Cobalt was a district very similar to what we have here in Globe. Same type of rocks. It's in a what we call a diabase host. It's a black, almost basalt-like rock. So same type of rock, same age rock. It's about 1 billion years old, the diabase itself, and also this unusual native silver type mineralization. In the case of cobalt, again, the veins were never very large. So the vein you see outside is probably the width of the actual vein in the ground. Veins were not very wide, but they were incredibly high grade. And they mined 400 million ounces of silver out of Cobalt, Ontario. So as silver deposits go, that's one of the largest. And here's another sample of the cobalt on the other side. And it's not all silver and cobalt. It is mixed with scudderudite. It's mixed with the nickel. Cobaltite, it's mixed with a little bit of arsenic up there. In the case of Globe, it's a lot cleaner. This is the nugget that was found in Globe in the 1880s. This is the Smithsonian. Other silver deposits, native silver deposits, primary silver deposits, also in the Keweenaw Peninsula in Michigan, and over in the Alhambra area in New Mexico. Similar type rocks again. They're all Proterozoic. They're very old rocks. The textures in our silver, it's a little bit variable, but in the case of our initial discovery of silver, it's fairly coarse-grained. And, our initial thought is this might be nice to make jewelry out of. Our business is not making jewelry. We've made some to display the quality of the rock because we've mined about 16,000 ounces just on the surface. This is what we picked up on the surface. And it'd be a shame to throw it into a smelter. And 16,000 ounces, from our perspective, we're commercial operators. We want to find something really big. It doesn't make a difference to us. So throwing it in a smelter really doesn't make much sense. It doesn't even give us a return on what we put into it, hardly. But it's a good way to display it, and we've made some bracelets, and that's on display out there too. It's got a very interesting texture. And unlike Cobalt Ontario, this is all silver. We did an assay, a fire assay, and usually when you do fire assays, you do it for gold in very low amounts. And you find a very small button. That's what they end up with, a very minuscule amount of gold or silver in any particular sample. Well, here we've got silver as big as buttons. So this will run between 50 and 70% silver, the rock itself. So the impurities in here are the quartz. And usually on every single sample, we don't assay every one of them. But we do a specific gravity test. And I think we've probably found about 200, 250 detrital pieces of silver. And we do specific gravities. We did a specific gravity on the big one. So you weigh it in air, you weigh it in water, and you get the specific gravity. You have basically the displacement in the water. And you can more or less calculate only two minerals in there, quartz and silver. You can calculate the silver grade. So it all ranges between 50 and 70%. The mineralogy, we haven't done a lot of work on this. Francis Sosa did some, but this is one of the smaller nuggets. That's probably a 50 or 100 gram nugget, I would think. It's got kind of a brain type texture to it, Looks like the convolutions of a brain in there. So we've done some petrographic work. And one of the interesting things about the silver here is it's got about 2% mercury in it. So the original discoverers, they found a couple pieces. They didn't know what it was. They melted it down. And I said, well, I hope you didn't do it in your house because you'd better abandon the house. It's full of mercury now. So about 2% mercury. We haven't identified any mercury minerals. What we have seen is just mercury disseminated through the silver, the native silver. Now, another thing that we found is tin. And there is a granite intrusion not too far away from the diabase. And I would expect that tin, which runs up to 6% tin in some of these samples. Again, we haven't identified a tin mineral. Seems to be incorporated into the lattice of the silver. And so the tin probably is derived from a very tin-rich granite. The other minerals we found, and it's a very low sulfur system, we found a little bit of acanthite. We found halapite and McKinstryite. And those are two minerals that I had never heard of until 2 years ago. Very small grains of it. We, as soon as we started wondering what to do with this stuff, we sent this out to a couple of cabbers, and they turned it into this. And I don't think we've sold a piece of this stuff yet, but there we go. Okay, and then a couple of local Bisbee artists. Oh, let me go back just a second here. No. It doesn't want to go back. Okay, let's see. Yeah. One more. Okay. So the bracelet was done by Andrew Laws down in Bisbee, and then the ring was done by Randall Pipcorn. So it makes good jewelry stock, basically. And then Kevin Smith here in Tucson, we had a piece, a large piece, and he essentially faceted the piece. So that's out in display as well. And I think it makes great jewelry, and we'll find somebody and we'll sell all 16,000 ounces to a jewelry maker, is my hope. Now, and some more jewelry done by those guys too. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting is, subsequent to our finding this, of course, you can't keep this stuff a secret very long, and there were other detectorists up there, and they didn't detect on our claims. 100 claims will cover about 3 square miles. And other companies have staked up most of the area. It's all staked up. To the south of us is basically BHP, a big copper company, and also to the east of us. But there are other silver deposits out there, and other detectorists went up there, and last year found some really spectacular silver, identical to this in every respect other than it didn't have quartz in it. So it was actually silver crystals. And those maybe some of you have seen them. They sold for a huge premium. I mean, a small piece was going for about $2,000 or so. I'll be happy with half that price. So because we're basically economic geologists, the superficial silver is more of an anomaly for us. It's a guide, and that's how we treat it. So we sold our property to a Canadian exploration company. They now have it, and they're doing the work on it. We have the right to collect everything from the surface, but they are now permitting to drill it. And the permitting process, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it probably takes about a year. And that's why small mining in the United States is on its way out. It really is, because a small miner does not have the resources to outlast the permitting process. And if you look at Resolution, they've been permitting for over 7 years. And I would say they're not any closer to getting this thing into production than they were years ago. So a country that was once built on resources and resource industry is now retreating from that. And it's going to be even tougher in the future. So this is a small deposit, but it's incredibly rich. And that's what makes it attractive. There are no small American mining companies anymore. They're Australian, they're Canadian, but they might have a business entity in the United States, but generally American companies aren't all that active, except the big gold companies, Newmont and I would say Freeport. They're still active. Anyway, these are the new owners of the property. Let's see. This is a little bit about the geology. I'll just talk a little about this. But the green dot is essentially where we found all this detrital silver. The pink is an intrusion where I think the tin came from. The brown is all the diabase, and the yellow is alluvium. And we did do a lot of soil sampling out there. That's how you find the veins. And we're after the vein. We're not after the small detrital stuff, although it's a guide. And there was really no soil anomaly, even despite the fact that we had 2% silver in some of the soil around the boulders. There was really no major trailing anomaly of silver off these nuggets. And this is a talk that was based for other geologists, but I'm going to give you a little insight here. There's a line of copper deposits and silver deposits in this part of the world. So one of the original discoveries of silver in Arizona was Silver King. That's not too far from the Magma Mine. Magma Mine is part of the Resolution deposit, which is probably the largest undeveloped copper deposit in the world. And then you've got a lineation of other copper deposits that end up at the Stonewall Jackson mine, which is McMillanville, and then the McMorris mine. And in the red area is our claim block. So there's a linear track over probably 30 miles of copper deposits along that line. Why is it along a line? We don't really know. It could be a major crustal fault. Neither here nor there, but our silver deposit is at the other end of this trend. Could there be a large copper deposit under that, like Resolution? It's definitely a possibility. One of the indications of copper deposits, I'll just show you that sample to the side, is this green epidote. And it occurs in veins peripheral to major copper deposits. And that has no silver in it, but it does have copper in it. And it's also on the claims that we staked. So silver might be at the surface, copper might be deeper. And I think that's it. Any questions?